Alright guys, today we're going to be talking about Shadar Logoth. This is sort of like a part of my series where I'm going to be deep diving major sort of like places and events that our adventurers go on, part of like my deep dive like lore sort of videos. And we already did Evan's Field and now we're doing Shadar Logoth. If you want me to do any other smaller places in between, you just let me know. But we're just going to mainly cover the main sort of places, their lore, what kind of happens there and all of that. And while we're deep diving into that, be sure to deep dive into my channel and subscribe, like the page, and sort of just comment like your favorite part of Wheel of Time. Comment anything about Wheel of Time or anything about Shadar Logoth of the video. Maybe if I missed something, you can mention that. I love having the discussion. I love talking with you guys. So let's keep the conversation going after the video. Now let's get into it. So there's not really going to be spoilers for the first half of this video. We're more going to talk about kind of like the lore and stuff like that. I guess some kind of spoilers for book 1, but closer to the end will be sort of major spoilers through near the ending of the books. I'll be sure to put warnings and stuff like that. But first we're going to start with sort of the lore of Shadar Logoth, kind of its origin, how it got there. Then we'll go into book events and then some, very big spoiler events. So Shadar Logoth in the old tongue means place where the shadow waits, or in more like simpler kind of terms is shadows waiting, which for me, like the direction that the show decided to go, it makes more sense about this like shadow and darkness. You can sort of see the depiction in the trailer of like this darkness coming over the entire city. And it's always talked about how the city's like super dark and all of that from the evil, which in the books is like what this actual thing is called Shadar. It's sort of this like misty sort of thing, but I'm glad the direction with the show, they made it more of like this creeping darkness. But we'll get into Shadar later and that sort of stuff. Let's get into more of the history of Shadar Logoth. Originally, Shadar Logoth was the capital of this ancient kingdom after the breaking of the world called Hall. It was a part of like the original like 10 kingdom pact. But during the Trolloc Wars, their king Balwin Mael, he sort of like gave up on the light. He didn't think that they would be able to win and all of that. And he actually had a advisor called Mordeth. And obviously his name doesn't really sound all that like bright and everything. So you can already tell like, no, this is not going to go well. We meet him at Shadar Logoth in the actual books, but he is the advisor to the king. He advises that they need to be even more evil than the darkness itself. That is the only way to defeat the darkness. So just be more dark than the darkness and you'll be able to defeat it. And obviously this does not turn out too well for them. So eventually the people of Hall become these like merciless, like terrible sort of people. It's even said that their enemies would rather see Shadow Spawn and Trollocs come toward them rather than like the people of Hall, because that's how like evil they became. Eventually this evil consumed them and was so bad that even the Dark One didn't even want to like go into the city. Like Shadow Spawn and stuff like that feared the city because of how dark it got. And eventually the nation fell under this darkness and it became the city known as Shadar Logoth. Now, what was the thing or what happened to make it this like dark sort of city? So like the people became super evil because that's what Mordeth said that they should do, is become more evil than the Dark One itself. But what actually happened in the city to cause it to be like an ancient ruin now? That was the beginning of the formless evil called Shadar. Shadar is described as this like formless evil, a mist throughout the city and stuff like that. And we see it in the books and we see it in the show with the little trailer of this like shadow that's eating the entire city. And that's basically like kind of what happened to the city. During the day, it's not really all that active, but people say that they can always feel like eyes are watching them. But during the nighttime, it's very deadly. It's this mist that comes over the entire city, and just by touching it, like, you die. Also, it's worth note saying that if you take anything from Shadar Logoth, it basically becomes like an illness. It's like poisoning you the entire time. The evil is like poisoning you. So what happens with Matt's dagger, he takes it from there, and the evil from Shadar Logoth is in the dagger, and he starts getting sick and stuff like that. We see that in the books. So Shadar's origin all starts from when Mordeth came into the city, started influencing the king. Basically, the events that started happening inside of Shadar Logoth was the people became so evil and so vile that even the women and children like started being suspicious of each other. All the men became suspicious of each other. They all just eventually had to be out for themselves or thought somebody else was going to kill them. So it came to the point that even women and children started killing each other. Everyone started killing each other in the streets until basically all of them were dead. And through that, like from that evil and from the cruelness of that, Shadar was formed. And it's an evil that is on the same level as the Dark One, basically. That's how they keep referring to it as. It got to the point that Trollocs would could try to find like refuge in the city when eventually everyone was dead, and they tried to make it out, but the mist trapped them in, and we can see written on the walls in their blood asking the Dark One to save them, but he wouldn't even go in and save them. That's like how bad this sort of evil is. So everyone dies in the city. It becomes a ruin except Mordeith. Mordeith is still alive inside of the city, and he roams sort of the streets to try to convince people to come on inside, so and then he can take over their bodies, which something eventually happens in the book, which he eventually succeeds at. I think it's very cool how Jordan plays with evil inside of his world, because we see like the Dark One as being evil, but we could also see that just like the cruelty of like humankind and like all of their evil is just as equal as the Dark One's, you know. And it's funny to see it with like the Forsaken throughout the books. Like they're okay, we're gonna start getting into more like spoiler region here, but they do their own thing for the most part, and they do their own evil acts. They just do it in the name of like the Dark One, but a lot of times they'll just not do what the Dark One wants them to do, and they're going to do their own thing, fulfill their own desires that are just as evil, you know. And I think that's really interesting, because the Dark One just wants to take away free will from humanity because he thinks he knows like what's best and stuff like that, but humanity will do whatever to oppress and everything to have control, just in the same way the Dark One will too. It's very interesting to see. And it comes into play especially near the end of the series, and it's super poetic, so I'll get into that in a second. So the ancient city and the capital of Eredhall is now turned into Shadar Logoth. It is this just like creepy city that no one wants to go into, super dark, super scary, that sort of thing. And now we pick up into the events of our books. So eventually Moraine, Lan, and our Emmonsfield 5 go into this city to be able to find refuge from these Trollocs, because they know that the Trollocs won't go in there because they know it's way too dark for them to even go in there. So they find refuge for a little bit, and Moraine tells them a little about the city, and they like do their little adventure around. Eventually they meet Mordeith, and Matt ends up taking the dagger from him, and obviously was not supposed to do that. Mordeith almost captures them, but they run away, and Matt ends up taking the dagger, and he tries to make it like justified why he took it, because it wasn't given to him, as Moraine like warned them, like nothing was supposed to be given to them, or it would be bad. But he was like, he didn't give it to me, I took it. But it's like, it's still the same sort of thing. You're not supposed to take anything for Shadar Logoth. And eventually our group has to run away from Shadar, and this is when our group sort of splits up, and they go their different ways, trying to like run away from Trollocs, trying to run away from Mordeith, and trying to run away from Shadar. So it's just this huge like crazy thing, and I'm really excited to see it in the show, how they're going to depict this like darkness eating the entire city. We don't really see Shadar Logoth until near the end of the series. I'm really excited to see how they're going to depict it in the show, especially with the shadows coming over. They said they're going to spend 15 minutes there, so a lot of really big world buildings going on. It plays a crucial role near the end of the series, so I get why they're going to spend so much time on it. But next, sort of what happens is Padan Fain is after them, so he goes into the city after they've already left, and he runs into Mordeith. But here, Mordeith and Padan Fain end up fusing because Mordeith tried to steal his body, but Padan Fain's soul was already like way too corrupt, so they end up fusing, just creating this like bigger, like evil kind of person, and Padan Fain is eventually kind of like transformed into this different kind of creature by the Dark One. So like I said, we don't come back to Shadar Logoth till near the end of the series, so get out now if you don't want to get any more spoilers. I have to say, this is like one of the top 10 moments of the Wheel of Time. It was super awesome the way it was depicted, all the setup and everything, so let's get into it. So the events that happen is Rand goes into Shadar Logoth with this whole plan with Nynaeve and all of them to be able to cleanse the male side of the taint and the one power. He does this by siphoning basically the taint and all of that into the city, and it ends up that Shadar and the taint are like of equal evil, and they eventually like cancel each other out. The amount of power that is taken to actually do this is a beacon to everyone in the wetlands that is a channeler to see this. So obviously this causes a lot of attention to be drawn to them, and actually the Forsaken come in, and while like the cleansing is going on, this crazy huge thing is happening. The Forsaken are trying to fight them, so it's this like huge scene of this massive amount of power that's going through Rand and all of this, and then the Forsaken are fighting them. It ends up happening that the taint gets cleansed, and during this fight, actually like this huge explosion sort of happens that literally decimates the entire city, and where it was is now this like giant circle of like a hole So Shadar Logoth is like destroyed, Shadar is destroyed, and all we're left of is like this huge hole in the ground. That's just like how massive it was. It is said that probably after that, since there was a lake right beside there, it becomes like a giant sort of like lake, which would be really cool to see. It's so cool to see the world building of Robert Jordan, where we had this ancient kingdom at the breaking of the world, and then through corruptness we see this like corrupt ruined city, and eventually it's used to be able to solve the problems with the male side of the channeling, and then after that it's just turned into this like landmark. Like the city's not there anymore, but there's this lake, and the people who lived in that time would know that that was Shadar Logoth. But now, you know, it's this, there's just a lake here now. But it's really cool to see, one of the biggest like epic moments in the series. But that's my main sort of like breakdown of Shadar Logoth, a little bit to its history, some events that happen in the books. Let me know what you guys' favorite part in Shadar Logoth is, or anything about Wheel of Time. I love talking about Wheel of Time with you guys. Love to keep the discussion going, so let's talk about it in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.